The Chymical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, the 6th day. Next morning, after we had woken one another, we sat together a while to talk about what would come of all this. Some thought that they would all return to life together. Others, on the contrary, thought that the death of the old ones would afford the young ones not only life, but increase. Others again believed that they had not been killed, but that different people had been beheaded in their place. After we had discussed it together for some time, the old gentleman entered, greeted us, and looked around to see if all was ready and the procedures carried out sufficiently. Our conduct had been such that he could find no fault with our diligence, and so he collected all the glasses together and packed them in a case. Soon a few youths came in, bringing with them several ladders, ropes, and large wings, which they laid down in front of us, and went out again. The old gentleman then began. "Dear sons, each must carry one of these 3 objects all day, but you are free either to choose one for yourselves or to draw lots for them." We said that we would like to choose. "No," replied the old gentleman, "it must be done by lot." Thereupon he made 3 tickets, on which he wrote respectively ladder, rope, and wings. These he placed in a hat, and each had to draw one, and that would be his. Those who got the ropes thought that they were best off, but I had a ladder, which annoyed me very much, as it was 12 feet long and quite heavy. I had to carry it, whereas the others could wind their flexible ropes around themselves. For the 3rd group, the old gentleman fixed on their wings as neatly as if they had grown there. Now he turned off a tap, and the fountain stopped running. We then had to remove it from the middle of the room. After everything had been cleared away, he took the case with the glasses and left, locking the door fast after him, so that we could only think that we were imprisoned in this tower. But before a quarter of an hour had passed, a round hole was opened high up, and there we saw our Virgin, who called to us, wished us good day, and invited us to come up. The ones with wings were quickly through the opening, and we others soon saw what our ladders were for. Only the ones with the ropes were in trouble, for as soon as one of us arrived up there, he was told to draw his ladder up after him. At last, each hung his rope on an iron hook, then had to climb up it, which was not to be done without blisters. When we were all up, the opening was closed again, and the Virgin gave us a kindly greeting. This room was as big as the tower, and had 6 attractive chambers a little higher than the room, into which one had to climb by 3 steps. We were distributed in these chambers to pray for the lives of the King and Queen. Meanwhile, the Virgin went in and out of the little door until we were ready. As soon as we had finished our business, a peculiar longish object was brought through the little door and placed in the middle by 12 persons, who had formerly been our musicians. My companions took it for a still, but I could well see that the corpses lay inside it, for the chest beneath was rectangular and easily big enough for 6 persons to lie inside. Then they went out again, fetched their instruments, and accompanied our Virgin and her maidservants with beautiful music. The Virgin carried a little chest, the rest only branches and small lamps, and some of them lighted torches. Then we were also given torches to hold, and were made to stand around the fountain. First stood the Virgin, with her maids around her in a circle, with their lamps and branches. Then we stood with the torches, Next, the musicians were in a row, and the other maidens also in a row. I did not know where these maidens had come from, whether they lived in the tower, or whether they had been brought there in the night, for all their faces were hidden with fine white veils, so that I could not recognize any of them. Now the Virgin opened the little chest, in which was a round object wrapped in thick green satin. She laid this in the upper vessel and covered it with a lid that was full of holes, and had a rim on which she poured some of the fluids that we had prepared yesterday. The still immediately began to flow, the liquid running back into the little vessel through 4 tubes. Under the lower vessel were many spikes on which the maidens hung their lamps, so that the heat came into the vessel and made the water simmer. When the water boiled, there were many small holes through which it could fall in on the corpses, and it was so hot that it dissolved all the bodies and turned them to liquid. My companions did not yet know what the round, wrapped-up thing above was, but I understood that it was the Moor's head, from which the water took on such extreme heat. Around the large vessel there were many holes in which the branches were stuck, though I did not know whether this was necessary or just a ritual. However, these branches were continually sprinkled by the still, and the drips that returned from them into the vessel were somewhat more yellow. The still had been running on its own accord for nearly 2 hours, but more feebly the longer it went on. In the meantime, the musicians broke ranks, and we walked about in the room, which was so set up that we had ample means of passing the time. Nothing had been omitted in the way of images, paintings, clocks, organs, running fountains and the like. At last it came to the point at which the still would run no longer, whereupon the Virgin had a round golden sphere brought in. At the bottom of the still was a tap, through which she let all the matter that had been dissolved by these hot drops run into the sphere, a portion of which was very red. The other water remained above in the vessel and was poured out. Then this still, which had now become much lighter, was taken out again. I myself cannot say whether it was opened outside or whether anything further of value remained in the corpses, but I do know that the water that was collected in the sphere was much heavier, for it took 6 or more of us to carry it, though by its size it should not have been too heavy for one. After the sphere had with difficulty been taken out through the door, we were left sitting alone again. But when I heard a coming and going above us, I had my eye to my ladder. One would have heard my companions give strange opinions about this still, for since they could not imagine the corpses to be anywhere but in the castle garden, they could not evaluate this process. But I thank God that I had woken up at such an opportune time, and seen that which helped me better in everything the Virgin did. After a quarter of an hour, the cover above us was opened, and we were commanded to come up, which we did as before, with wings, ladders, and ropes. It annoyed me somehow that the maidens must have gone up by another way, while we had to work so hard. But I realized that there was something special about it. Even those with wings had no advantage, except when they came to pass through the opening. When we got up there, and the aperture had been closed, I saw the sphere in the middle of the room, hanging by a strong chain. There was nothing in this room but plain windows, and between each pair of them a door, which concealed nothing but a great polished mirror. These windows and mirrors were placed opposite each other for optical effect, such that, when the sun, now shining more brightly than usual, met just one of the doors, nothing but sun was visible throughout the whole room, so long as the window facing the sun was open. and the doors in front of the mirrors likewise. Through artificial reflection, they all shone onto the golden sphere which hung in the centre, and since this too was highly polished, it gave off such a blaze that none of us could keep his eyes open. We had to look out of the windows until the sphere was well heated and the desired effect achieved. Here I must say that in this mirroring I beheld the most wonderful thing that nature ever brought to light, for everywhere there were suns, but the sphere in the centre shone even brighter, so that like the sun we could not bear to look at it for a moment. At last the Virgin commanded the mirrors to be closed again and the windows shut, so that the sphere could cool off a little, and this occurred towards 7 o'clock. We thought this was good, since we could now have a vacation and refresh ourselves a little with breakfast. But this collation was extremely philosophical, and we had no need to worry about intemperance, yet we were not starved. The hope of coming joy, which the Virgin continually comforted us, made us so happy that we gave no heed to labour or inconvenience. I can also say this truly of my illustrious companions, that they never thought of kitchen or table, but their pleasure was only in the pursuit of such adventurous physics, and in the contemplation therein of the Creator's wisdom and omnipotence. After we had taken our meal, we settled down to work again, for the sphere had sufficiently cooled. With great trouble and difficulty, we had to lift it off the chain and onto the floor. Now came the debate over how we were to divide it, because our instructions were to cut it apart in the middle. A sharp diamond turned out to be the best in the end. When we opened the sphere, there was nothing red inside it but a beautiful large snow-white egg. It pleased us immensely that it had turned out so well, for the Virgin was always worrying that the shell might be too fragile. We stood around this egg with as much joy as if we had laid it ourselves. But the Virgin soon had it removed, disappeared herself, and as always locked the door. I do not know whether she did something out there with the egg, or whether something clandestine was done to it, but I do not believe so. We, however, had to wait by ourselves for a quarter of an hour till the third hole was opened, and we came by means of our apparatus to the fourth story or floor. In this chamber we found a great copper vessel filled with yellow sand, warmed by a gentle fire, in which the egg was buried so as to come to full maturity. This vessel was square, and on one side there were verses written in large letters. On the other side were these three words: health, snow, lance. Third had nothing but the single word, fiat, so be it. But on the back was a whole inscription, reading as follows: what fire, air, water, earth could not rob from the holy ashes of our kings and queens, the faithful flock of alchemists has gathered in this urn, A.D. 1459. I leave it for the learned to argue about whether the sand or the egg was meant by it. I will do my part and leave nothing unsaid. Now our egg was ready and was taken out. It needed no cracking, for the bird inside soon extracted itself, and appeared quite happy, although it looked very bloody and unformed. We placed it first on the warm sand, and the Virgin said that before anything was given it to eat, we should tie it up, otherwise it would give us all trouble aplenty. This was done, then the food was brought to it, which was surely none other than the blood of the beheaded people, diluted again with prepared water. The bird grew so fast beneath our very eyes that we could understand why the Virgin had warned us about it. It bit and scratched about itself so fiercely that if anyone had fallen into its clutches, it would soon have done away with him. Now it was quite black and wild, so that another food was brought for it, perhaps the blood of another royal person. Whereupon all the black feathers fell out again, and in their place there grew snow-white plumage. Then it became somewhat tamer and easier to deal with, though we still did not trust it. With the third meal, its feathers began to become coloured, and so beautifully that in all my life I have never seen such colours to compare. By now the bird was extremely docile and so friendly towards us that with the Virgin's consent we let it out of captivity. "Now," she began, "since through your hard work and our old gentleman's permission, the bird has been endowed with life and great perfection, it is proper for us to give it a joyful consecration." Thereupon she ordered lunch to be brought in, and us to relax, since now the most demanding work was over, and it was fitting for us to enjoy our past labours. We began to be merry again, though we still had on our mourning clothes, which seemed to make a rather mockery of our joy. The Virgin kept asking questions, perhaps to find out which of us would be best served by her forthcoming scheme. She was mostly concerned with smelting, and was very pleased when she found someone adept in the fine manipulations which distinguish an artist. This luncheon lasted no longer than 3/4 of an hour, most of which we spent with our bird, which we continually had to feed with its food, but it now stayed the same size. We were not left very long to digest our meal, but after the Virgin had gone away, together with the bird, the 5th chamber was opened to us, where we offered our services after getting there in the accustomed way. In this room, a bath was prepared for our bird, coloured with a fine white powder so as to look like pure milk. It was cool at first, and when the bird was put in it, enjoyed it, drinking out of it and playing around. But then it began to be heated by the lamps placed underneath, and we had trouble keeping the bird in the bath. So we clapped a lid on the vessel, but let it stick its head out through a hole. In this bath, it shed all its feathers and became as smooth as a human being. Also the heat no longer hurt it. This amazed me, since all its feathers were consumed in this bath, colouring the water blue. At length we gave the bird air, and it sprang out of the vessel by itself, so shining smooth that it was a delight to see. But since it was still somewhat wild, we had to put a collar with a chain around its neck, and thus led it up and down the room. Meanwhile, a strong fire was lit under the vessel, and the bath was boiled away until it turned all to a blue stone, which we took out and crushed. Then we had to grind it on a stone, and finally paint the bird's skin all over with the resulting colour. Now it looked stranger still, for it was blue all over except for his head, which stayed white. Now all our work on this floor was completed, so after the Virgin had left with our blue bird, we were summoned through the opening to the 6th floor, whither we went. Here we were much troubled, for in the middle there stood an altar, exactly as described above in the King's Hall. On it stood the 6 objects I have mentioned, and the bird itself made a 7th. First, the little fountain was set before it, from which it drank a good draught. Then it pecked the white snake until it was badly bleeding. Then we had to collect this blood in a golden beaker and pour it down the throat of the bird, who resisted violently. Next, we dipped the snake's head into the fountain so that it came back to life and crept into its death's head, after which I saw nothing of it for a long time. Meanwhile, the sphere was moving ever forward until it made the desired conjunction, and the little clock immediately struck 1. Thereupon followed another conjunction, and the clock struck 2. Finally, as we observed the third conjunction, and it was signalled by the clock, the poor bird submissively laid its neck on the book, and willingly allowed its head to be struck off by one of us, chosen for this by lot. It gave forth not a drop of blood until its breast was opened, when the blood spurted out, as fresh and clear as if it had been a fountain of rubies. Its death touched us to the heart, yet we could not imagine that a mere bird would help us much, so we let it be. We cleared it off the altar and helped the Virgin burn it to ashes, together with a small tablet hanging nearby, with fire lit from the taper. The ashes were purified several times and carefully preserved in a box of cypress wood. Here I cannot conceal what a trick was played on me and 3 others. After we had carefully put away the ashes, the Virgin began thus: "Dear sirs, we are now in the 6th chamber, and have only one more before us, in which our labours will be at an end. We will travel back to our castle to awaken our most gracious lords and ladies. I would have wished that all of you gathered together here had conducted yourself in such a way that I could have commended you to our most worthy King and Queen, and that you might have received a fitting reward. But these 4, here she pointed to me and 3 others, have proved, against my wishes, to be lazy and indolent workers. However, because of my charity towards one and all, I do not want to deliver them to their well-deserved punishment. Yet so that such idleness shall not remain wholly unpunished, I propose this for them: they alone shall be excluded from the forthcoming 7th operation, the most wondrous of all, but they will not need to make further atonement afterwards before their majesties." I leave others to imagine how I felt after this speech, for the Virgin was able to look so serious that the floods overflowed, and we thought ourselves the most miserable of all men. Then the Virgin had the musicians called by one of the maidservants, of whom there were always many at hand, and they with their cornets had to play us out of the door with such mockery and derision that they could scarcely blow for laughing. What hurt us especially was that the Virgin herself found our tears, anger, and impatience so amusing, and that among our companions there may have been some who enjoyed our discomfiture. But it turned out quite differently, for as soon as we were out of the door, the musicians told us to cheer up and follow them up the spiral stair that led past the 7th story to beneath the roof. Here we found the old gentleman, whom we had not seen hitherto, standing on a little round furnace. He received us kindly and congratulated us heartily on being thus chosen by the Virgin. But when he understood the fright we had received, he almost burst himself laughing at us for having taken our good fortune so ill. "So, dear sons, learn from this," he said, "that man never knows what good things God intends for him." As he was speaking, the Virgin came running in with her box, and after she was done laughing at us, she emptied the ashes into another container and filled hers up again with a different substance, explaining that she must now throw some sand in the other artist's eyes, but that we should do as the old gentleman told us, and especially not let our efforts flag. Thereupon she left us for the 7th room, into which she summoned our companions. What she first did with them, I cannot tell. What she first did with them there, I cannot tell. For not only were they strictly forbidden to say, but because of our duties, we did not dare to spy on them through the ceiling. Our work was as follows. We had to saturate the ashes with our previously prepared water until they became a thin paste. Then we set the material on the fire until it was well heated. While it was hot, we poured it out into 2 little forms or moulds and let it cool slightly. Now we had a moment to spy on our companions through some cracks. They were busy with an oven, each one having to blow the fire himself with a pipe. Around they stood, blowing fit to burst, but still thinking it wonderful and how much better off they were than us. This blowing went on so long that our old gentleman called us back, so that I do not know what happened afterwards. We opened up the moulds, and there were 2 beautiful, bright, and almost transparent images, such as human eyes have never seen, of a little boy and girl, each only 4 inches long. What amazed me the most was that they were not hard, but as soft and flesh-like as any human being, but they had no life. I'm quite certain that the Lady Venus's image was made in some such way. These babies, lovely as angels, we laid first on 2 satin cushions, and gazed at them for a long time, reduced to idiocy by such an enchanting spectacle. But the old gentleman roused us and told us continually to let one drop after another of the bird's blood, which had been caught in the golden beaker, fall into the images' mouths. This apparently made them grow, and whereas they started out tiny, now each only 4 inches long. What amazed me the most was that they were not hard, but as soft and flesh-like as any human being, but they had no life. I'm quite certain that the Lady Venus's images, image was made in some such way. These babies, lovely as angels, we laid first on 2 satin cushions, and gazed at them for a long time, reduced to idiocy by such an enchanting spectacle. But the old gentleman roused us, and told us continually to let one drop after another of the bird's blood, which had been caught in the golden beaker, fall into the images' mouths. This, apparently, made them grow. But whereas they had started out tiny, now they grew more beautiful in proportion to their size. Would that all painters could have been here, to be ashamed of their art in the face of these creations of nature. Now they were getting so big that we lifted them off the cushions and had to lay them on a long table covered with white velvet, as the old gentleman directed us, and covered them as far as the chest with a soft white satin sheet. They were so inexpressibly beautiful that we did this almost reluctantly. In short, before we had used up all the blood, they were already full grown, and both of them had curly, golden yellow hair. The image of Venus was nothing to them. But there was no natural warmth there, no feeling. They were dead images, yet lively and natural in colour. For fear that they might grow up too big, the old gentleman had them fed no more, but pulled the sheet up over their faces and had the table stuck around with torches. Here I must warn the reader not to think of these lights as necessary, for the old gentleman's intention was merely that we should not see when the souls came into them. We would not have noticed it had I not twice before seen the flames, but I let the other 3 rest in their belief, nor did the old gentleman know that I had seen anything more. Hereupon he asked us to sit down on a bench opposite the table, and presently the Virgin came in with the musicians and all the apparatus. She carried 2 beautiful white garments of a sort I had never seen in the castle, nor can I describe them, for I could only think that they were made of pure crystal, only soft and opaque. That is all I can say about them. She laid them down on a table, and after setting her maidens around the bench, she and the old gentleman began to do a lot of conjuring round the table, which was only to confuse us. This happened, as I said, under the roof, which was made in a remarkable way. Inside, there were 7 concave hemispheres. The middle one was somewhat higher, and had at the top a small round hole, which was closed, and which none of the others had observed. After much ceremony, 6 maidens came in, each carrying a large trumpet that was wound round with a green, fiery, luminous material, like a wreath. The old gentleman took one of them, and after removing some of the lights at the head of the table and uncovering the faces, he set a trumpet in each of the mouths, so that the upper and wider part came exactly to the roof vent. My companions were staring only at the bodies, but I had other thoughts, for as soon as the foliage or wreath around the tube was kindled, I saw the hole open above, and a bright stream of fire shoot through the tube and pass into the body. Then the hole was shut up again, and the trumpet removed, through which trick my companions were deceived into thinking that life had entered the image through the fire of the foliage. As soon as the soul was received, the body opened and closed its eyes, but scarcely moved. Again, he placed another tube on its mouth, lit it, and the soul was let down through the tube, and this happened 3 times to each. Then all the lights were extinguished and removed, the velvet tablecloth folded over the bodies, and a double bed set up and prepared, on which the wrapped bodies were placed. They were taken out of the coverings, laid neatly side by side, and left to sleep a good while with the curtains drawn. Now it was time for the Virgin to see how her other artists were faring. They were quite happy, for as the Virgin later told me, they were having to work in gold, which is also a part of this art, though not the noblest, the most necessary or the best. They also had a portion of these ashes, and were firmly convinced that the whole bird was provided for the sake of gold, and that thus the dead bodies would be brought back to life. Meanwhile, we sat silently waiting for our couple to awaken, which took place after about half an hour. Now cheeky Cupid came in again, and after greeting each of us, flew in under the bed curtain and pestered them until they awoke. This caused them great astonishment, for they thought that they had simply slept from the moment they were beheaded until now. Cupid, after he had woken them and introduced them to one another again, stepped aside a little and let the 2 of them recover somewhat. Then he aimed his tricks at us, and in the end we were obliged to fetch the musicians for him and to be more cheerful. Not long afterwards, the Virgin herself entered, and after she had humbly greeted the young king and queen, who still felt rather weak, and kissed their hands, she brought them the 2 beautiful garments I mentioned, which they put on and thus stepped forward. Now 2 fine seats had been made ready, and there they sat, to be greeted by us with the deepest submission. The king, in his own person, most graciously thanked us and again assured us of his favour. It was already about 5 o'clock, and they could not stay longer, but as soon as the most important things could be loaded, we led the young royal persons down the spiral staircase, through all the doors and guards, to the ship. There they embarked with some of the maidens and Cupid, and sailed away so swiftly that we soon lost sight of them. But I was told that they were met by many stately ships, and that in 4 hours they had traversed many miles of sea. After 5 o'clock, the musicians were told to take everything back onto the ships and to prepare for departure. But since it was going rather slowly, the old gentleman for the first time brought out some of his secret soldiers, who up to now had been hidden in the ramparts so that we had seen none of them. From this I could tell that the tower was well provided against opposition. These soldiers made short work of our stuff, so there was soon no more to be done than to eat supper. The table was already set, as the Virgin brought us back to our companions. We had to look downcast and keep from laughing, but they smiled at one another, though a few of them were very sorry for us. The old gentleman was also with us at supper, and a keen inspector he was. None could say anything so clever that he would not either turn it around or cap it, or at least give some good information about it. I learnt a great deal from this gentleman, and it would be excellent if everyone were to go to him and learn his business. Then things would often not turn out so badly. After we had eaten supper, the old gentleman led us first into his cabinets of curiosities, here and there in the bastions. There we saw such marvels of nature and other things imitated from nature by the human mind, that even a year could not have sufficed us. We examined them by lamplight far into the night. At last, when we desired sleep, more than seeing any further strange thing, we were led to our quarters, and there, in the rampart, had not only fine, comfortable beds, but unusually elegant rooms. This made us wonder all the more why we had been made to suffer so yesterday. I slept well in my bedroom, and since I was largely unworried and weary from constant working, the soft rushing of the sea helped me to a sound and gentle sleep, and I continued in a dream from 11 o'clock at night until 8 in the morning.